So I've got basically the first few paragraphs of a paper outlined here. So my intro, I have my thesis statement down for this introductory paragraph. We do want to have my introductory paragraph ultimately, entice the reader, sort of introduce some of my arguments, and then provide my thesis statement. I've got my thesis statement. That's the meat of that intro paragraph, so I've got that listed there. My first body paragraph to prove this thesis statement is going to be about the father's relics in this play, what's left behind by the father. So my first example is going to be about the portrait. I'm going to talk about how the portrait is a reminder of the family's failures. And then I'm going to quote the play. And William's description D is what I've labeled that quote from the play. Then I'm going to explain how this quote supports my point about the portrait. And then let's say I've got a quote from Harold Bloom where he's discussing this portrait as well, and that's quote A. And I'll include that quote. And then I will explain how Bloom's quote supports my point about the portrait, or reveals something about the portrait, and it's being a reminder of the family's failures. Alright, number 2, then I'm going to discuss the second relic I'm going to talk about is the photograph records, and I'm going to talk about how they're worn and tired, and they are showing how the family still clings to the past. And I'm going to quote the play, and then I'm going to explain how this quote from the play supports my point about the phonograph records. And then I've got critic Jones, that he had a good quote about these records, and then I'm going to quote him, and then I'm going to explain how his quote supports what I'm saying. And my next paragraph is about the character Amanda and her dreams. So my first point about her dreams is about her gentleman callers, and then I'm going to quote the play, and I'm going to explain how this quote supports my point about gentleman callers. Then my next point is the business college and her hopes for Laura. I'm going to quote the play, and then explain how this quote supports my point about the business college and Amanda's hopes for Laura. So you'll notice I don't have a secondary source for every point I make, and you may not, and that's okay. And you may not even use a secondary source in a given paragraph. In this paragraph, I seem to have a quote from a secondary source from Bloom that I want to use. And so I talk about Amanda's, the gentleman caller, Laura's gentleman caller, and the haunting images of him that can be found in the play. So I'm kind of summarizing where he can be found in there. And then I quote Bloom. So I don't quote the play this time, but I quote this critic, and then I explain how this critic supports my point about her gentleman callers. So you notice each of these paragraphs becomes very lengthy. So like Amanda's dreams, I've got a topic sentence about Amanda's dreams, and then I've got this sentence about the gentleman callers, and I've got a quote, and then I explain my quote, and then this, and then this. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then a closing sentence, so about 11, So I'm looking at an 11 to 12 sentence paragraph here, and that's pretty normal for a research paper. Usually the paragraphs are somewhere between like 10 and 16 sentences long, which does mean the paragraphs themselves are very lengthy, but you'll have fewer paragraphs to write on. For 3 to 5 pages, I've seen 5 paragraphs through 8 paragraphs be enough, rather than what you have been doing, which is closer to usually 10 to 15 paragraphs. So they're long paragraphs, but fewer of them usually. Now we want to write the rough draft of our paper. And I'll be going over MLA format guidelines in a moment. Then we'll proofread our rough draft, and not perhaps, but we will bring it to a tutor. That is required this go-round. We will have a student tutor available after your mock Regents tests. So you can bring it to her, or you can bring it to a traditional tutor, or you can bring it both, that'd be fine too. But you must bring it to a tutor, have someone look at your rough draft. Then we'll write the final draft of our paper, and then we will turn in our paper. And if you want to see an example research paper, you can look on page 450 through 454 in a writer's reference. You'll notice that it's very similar looking to what we've been doing. It's basically the same Times New Roman, same font, double spaced, same header, same page number at the top. The big difference is that there's an incorporation of research materials or source material. And you'll notice that every time a source is quoted, that source is referenced. Like in that very first paragraph, you have a quote or some statistics that are referenced. And it tells you it's on page 1 of this association source. And then if we want to know what that source is specifically, we flip to the last page of the essay, the works cited page. And we can see it's the second source down, and we can go to that website and we can look at page 1 of that source and presumably find this information they just referenced. So every time we give a quote, we're going to be citing things properly. We're going to be citing it in the text as well as on the works cited page.